So thank you very much. My warmest thanks to Rector Fulhammer of the Danube University Krems, to Professor Oliver Grau, to Dr. Wendy Coombs, for the pleasure to be able to present my research to you today. Coming here is like rejoining a family, and in this case, it's the Media Arts Cultural Consortium, and I acknowledge our colleagues in the room. My thanks also to Janina and Viola for taking such good care of me. In response to Professor Ishii's talk, Making Digital Tangible, one way to create a bifold thematic is for me to focus on making intangible digital. So I spontaneously changed the title of my talk, and in doing so, will explore the challenges of intangible cultural heritage and the processes of digital documentation, reproduction, and transmission in the museological context. The research that I'm going to talk about emerges from 20 years in designing interactive frameworks for public engagement with cultural heritage. This work was originally located at Museum Victoria in Melbourne, Australia. Then, in collaboration with the University Sector iCinema Research Centre in Sydney, I then co-established with Professor Geoffrey Shaw the Applied Laboratory for Interactive Visualization and Embodiment, ALIVE, at the Hong Kong Science Park in Hong Kong. I returned to Australia and founded the Expanded Perception and Interaction Centre, EPICentre, at the University of New South Wales, where I created some powerful visualization systems that you can see here. Just so you know what you're looking at, the left-hand side is a high-resolution Turing full-dome system, and on the right-hand side is 56 projector, 29 computer cluster. It's a 7-meter diameter panorama, which is 3 times higher resolution than anything else in the world at the moment. These machines are at the edge of human visual acuity, and they're designed to solve problems for complexity and big data in the humanities and the sciences. We worked together with Imperial College London to create omic or phenome network visualizations, single-cell science and single-cell microscopy, reducing 53 parameters of data to a 3D space. And now on the shores of Lake Geneva, a 1,500-meter square laboratory, the Lab for Experimental Museology. The systems that we have there, 9 systems in total, offer us strategies for multi-sensory engagement, emphasizing human-to-human as well as human-to-machine interaction, giving us powerful ways to reformulate narrative in a digital context. These laboratories harness data and technologies that have unprecedented abilities to capture the world around us. Laser scanning, for example, collects billions of points to represent places, such as these heads at Mount Rushmore, scanned by the Scottish 10. We can create precious objects in 3D and peer inside to see what was previously unseen. We can capture art in a way that lets us zoom into the tiniest brushstroke to reveal more than the naked eye can see. We're subjecting our cultural treasures to X-ray fluorescence bombardment. Here, what dubious painting of Henry VIII by an anonymous painter, and X-ray fluorescence reveals its chemical materiality. We're also using photogrammetry and machine learning to improve pixels. Here you see Nefertari's tomb, and it was 8 hours of photogrammetry and then deep physically based rendering, which was able to create a completely navigable model of billions and billions of points. And we are also archiving embodied knowledge systems through motion capture and new forms of motion analysis. And as it is with this preamble, I think we can begin this speech. In contrast to tangible heritage, such as monuments, objects, and documents, intangible cultural expressions are enacted, socially transmitted, and intimately linked to people. These practices are defined by their reliance on tacit and embodied knowledge systems. Intangible heritage as a field of research and area of cultural policy has grown significantly since 2003 and signals a shift away from isolated views of heritage as physical, tangible manifestations of national cultural identity toward holistic visions of cultural modalities and regional local identities. Heritage organizations have established that the separation of natural heritage from cultural heritage and the archive from the intangible are highly problematic and artificial demarcations. Furthermore, heritage has recently been reconceived in the context of the Anthropocene, necessarily extending temporalities, relationships, effects, and entanglements. By dissolving the boundaries between existing classifications and incorporating the pressing social, economic, political, and ecological issues of our time, we will be able to redefine and reconceptualize heritage narratives as well as our understanding of historical processes in order to establish shared historical and heritage futures. In my work, the intangible heritage is not, or on intangible heritage, is not a single field of research and encompasses many themes, including symbolic archaeology, authenticity, new materiality, sociocultural and political prosthesis, inactive learning, digital aesthetics, performative interfaces, cultural memory agency, the archive, and new museology. The 2003 Convention for Intangible Cultural Heritage defines living heritage as that which is transmitted yet constantly recreated. Importantly, UNESCO maintains that it is the communities of practitioners who decides what is ICH. And one aspect of the ICH domain that interests me is how reenactment functions as an aid to memory and society, whether ongoing traditions or whether from an ongoing tradition, or one where it is reconstructed from, let's say, historical manuscripts. With widespread appeal from the reenactment of battle scenes to historical martial arts that you see here, the European historical martial arts groups, from performance art to ancient rites of passage, reenactment engages in complex temporalities. As a central, corporeal, and kinesthetic tool, reenactment has the potential to democratize historical knowledge with its inventive and social modes of representation. For scholars, reenactment is a process of critical thinking that allows us to dig deeper than the standard modes of history and heritage production, signifying the opportunity for a new embodied historiography. In heritage terms, reenactment also challenges our understanding of authorship and authenticity because it offers non-specialist audiences authentic experiences and representations of history. As an alternative to conventional historical production and curatorship, reenactment research represents a timely yet unexploited opportunity to create new knowledge by immersing subjects inside the object of inquiry. The codification and archiving of ICH forms has been described as a potentially dangerous and transformative process that arrests culture within outdated notions of heritage as a non-renewable resource. As a result, ICH research and curation remains dominated by modes of representation entrenched from the late 19th century and that are manifest today in linear audiovisual forms. This presentation goes on to explore ways that might refresh this situation through the technologies of corporeality, in which temporality figures as both the relative measure between movements of a single event and as a critical aspect of context, whereby an event is considered in an ongoing trajectory of tradition. The Hong Kong context is an extraordinary reservoir of intangible cultural heritage, primarily of the Hakka people. From the early to the mid-20th century, Hong Kong provided refuge for teeming thousands of migrants from mainland China, and among them some of the most prominent martial artists in the world. With globalization, urbanization, and dwindling numbers of practitioners, this living heritage made internationally so famous by Jackie Chan, Gordon Liu, and Hong Kong cinema is now in danger of becoming lost. And I'll just make a side note here to recognize the great bravery of the students and the people in Hong Kong today. The Hong Kong Martial Arts Living Archive was initiated by myself and the International Gao Chu Association at City University of Hong Kong. The archive contains a 4D typology based on extensive motion capture and a host of green screen and high-speed video methods. Currently comprised of 130 sets of empty hand and weapon sequences, the archive continues to grow and represents 19 styles by 33 elite practitioners at currently 56% of the total repertoire. That was Oscar. You could see here, obviously, from the mocap data, we can make a 3D model and we can begin to automatically annotate this left hand, right hand, left foot, right foot, and the dantian point in the center of the body. Kung Fu forms have been traditionally passed on through oral tradition, couched in esoteric language, and more recently in two-dimensional graphics with annotations. The repertoire is based on Taolu, prearranged movement sequences used for teaching, learning, and practicing and performing traditional martial arts, and were initially created as mnemonic aids whereby learning consists of memorization through imitation and repetition. In 2011, Mark Franco explored the history of dance notation and documentations, charting shifts from written coded steps to non-word tracking systems to image of dancers and a focus on the dancer's body rather than their technique or movement through space, to the development of labo notation, the use of video, and finally, the advent of the digital, placing motion capture at the forefront of the documentation timeline. He says, motion capture provides us a continuous topological model which allows for the easier retainment of the effective qualities of movement. Since 2012, we've had 7 exhibitions worldwide. These are just a couple of the posters, 4 of the posters from these exhibitions. We will open another one in Zurich shortly. One of the systems that's central to some of these exhibitions is a rear projected 6-side enclosure called Reactor that allows visitors to walk around and view the Kung Fu master at 1-to-1 scale inside. And this is interactive application in which Kung Fu forms can be reinterpreted as a series of motion over time analysis. It's a 3D interface, interactive interface with 3D data. And this analysis here gives speed on the body at any moment in the motion. And this is a typical particle animation. The difference between capture and notation is crucially important. We can employ Brian Rotman's term corporeal of gestural haptic writing instead of translating movement into symbols, which is done when speech is transposed into writing. Gestural haptic writing is a mediating technology that escapes purely signifying in the representational by operating within the interactive, immersive, and participatory regimes that we offer in the exhibition. Echoing advances in labo notation, the project is continuing to advance automated systems for describing and analyzing human and movement. It provides a set of resources for teaching and learning through simulation, with application in serious games, museum exhibitions, and even robotics. This is Lam Sai Wing. He was the first he was a fight choreographer and master, and he was the first one to use photography in studio practice. We have hand drawings of him performing iron wire boxing, so we created a 3D model of him based on the photographic materials, and then asked his great-great-grandnephew to perform iron wire boxing, and the mocap data and the model were joined together to form a new form of archival object. This is a kind of chi-building exercise. From a neurological perspective, the existence of mirror neurons gives us insights into how these work as a mode of transmission. The mirror neuron, he's awfully noisy, isn't he? Maybe we could turn him down a bit. The mirror neuron is a neuron that fires both when a human acts and when at the same time that action is observed by somebody else, it fires in them as well. So by watching alone, we see a form of knowledge transfer at a very basic biological level. Taylor also, Diana Taylor, performance theorist, acknowledges that enacting the repertoire, that is propagating knowledge through the body, must be still considered a form of mediation. If we apply this to intangible heritage, it means that embodied traditions in their ideal states of vitality are always involved in acts of representation because their very status as a tradition necessitates reenactment. She says, embodied and performed acts generate, record, and transmit knowledge. The processes of documentation create synthetic links or prosthesis in which embodied knowledge transmission can take place. And here we see the ways in which we can read mocap's written traces and perform or reenact the gesture on display. Other modes of documentation include 500 and 1,000 frames a second. This is Yao Wan Hua. A linear navigator is framed as a thematic browser which allows us to traverse a whole series of masters practicing with their weapons. Hakka people were traditionally poor farmers, so their weapons are quite crude, yet to master them is years of practice. We film in a myriad of green screen contexts. This is a unicorn, the totem of the Hakka people. In our most recent exhibition, a new panoramic navigator democratizes the eye of the camera and giving the viewer a 360-degree visual plane. While aerial, that's this one, rotating the field of view in 360 degrees. And then drone footage of a Jal festival that's only held once every 10 years. The exhibition includes hand-painted, imagination-driven posters signaling to us how Kung Fu moved across the world through Hong Kong cinema. And these were typically placed in Ghanese villages, and then they would watch the movie on the small screen that you see there. This is a typical clan meeting in Hong Kong in the 1970s, but today it looks like this. So Master Lam in the middle with his European novices. Hong Kong people and Chinese people are not learning Kung Fu. It's Europeans and Americans who flock to Hong Kong to do so. We are also embarking on a new set of research which compares European historical martial arts with South Chinese martial arts based on comparative studies of 15th century fight books stemming from both Asia and Europe. The second project I'll discuss, Remaking the Confucian Rites, also began in 2012, also ongoing. The commitment to do intangible heritage is a commitment to community and research practice, which is very long term. This project is focused on the Chinese body to recreate specific rituals. Confucian Li is a concept that covers the realms of aesthetics, ethics, and ideology. And it's also a technique of the body, a skill that is learnt and inscribed. This is a project led by Professor Pang at Tsinghua University, Director for the Center of Ritual Studies in Beijing, in collaboration with myself at EPFL and City University of Hong Kong and Jialin Hall. We have embarked on a mission of harnessing contemporary technologies to transpose the contents of Yi Li into a digital archive with strong public appeal that gives audiences introduction to cultural life of China of thousands of years ago. The project also has relevance today as an important alternative system of knowledge, an example of aesthetics as politics as opposed to politicized aesthetics. The Book of Etiquette and Rites, Yi Li, lies at the core of the Confucian canon. There are 17 rites, and they're written in the style of a performance manual. Yi Li was passed down through the generation of Confucian followers and records in vivid detail Chinese social life. Yet as time passed and society changed, Yi Li was considered to be difficult to read and understand. Ultimately, all Confucian rites were deinstitutionalized in 1911 with the First Republican Revolution, although social rituals continued on a folk level until the 1950s when the communist regime banned all formal rites. This is broken transmission. However, as a compendium of Chinese etiquette and ritual, it is recognized as having great academic and cultural value. And in China's current day Confucian revival, we see how China can have a socio-political future in harmony with its philosophical and ethical past. In these sequences of the capping ceremony, the actors' exact movements are scientifically documented using digital video and motion capture, as well as techniques such as turntable recordings of actors, their costumes, and ritual utensils. Ultimately, the project explores innovative visualization solutions to achieve the highest levels of interpretive appreciation, where the exact articulation of movement, gesture, and meaning can be interactively studied by the viewer. This work already finds its way in the world at its early stages, mainly as triptych videos, first for the opening of the China Exchange in London. It's been picked up in the contemporary art circuit for the Slovenia Biennale in 2016, and most recently accompanying an object show of ceremonial vessels at the Art Institute of Chicago. I'm just going to explore the archery ceremony a little bit so that you can understand the scale at which this project is taking place. In a huge green screen studio, everything is shot at 1-to-1 scale. And the architecture, the temple architecture, of which there is little information, is rebuilt through scholarly analysis. All the ritual utensils, all the costumes are built through Professor Pang and his team, and the close reading that they do of the 5th century manuscript of Yi Li. The actors are the Beijing Opera, and here they're being trained in the Confucian rites. A range of documentation techniques to give us a set of resources that ultimately are recombinable in game engine type environments. Here you see everything but the actors is completed out of computer graphics, so eventually no set is required. As a system of awareness and practice, Confucian Li highlights issues about the Chinese modern body, and this project therefore is also an archaeology of the modern. To become modern requires a radically alternative regime of the body, and within this regime is embedded the ideology of the Chinese modern. And just by conclusion, in collaboration with the National Museum of Australia, a full dome work we created, Travelling Kankarangalpa, which is a songline of the 7 sisters of the Aboriginal people in Australia. It portrays one of the most defining and predominant meta-narratives chronicled in ancient mainland Australia, the story of a predatory, rejected loner and ancestral being in the guise of a man who relentlessly pursues 7 sisters across the country. It's a morality tale, ancient wisdom, especially pertinent in the age of Me Too. So many of these communities have shared their songlines, but many have not. And this particular community have had a very traumatic history with colonial contact, Maralinga, Woomera. These groups are very wary of disclosing sacred knowledge and have withheld themselves from the art market as well on that basis. So this songline had never been told in the public domain, but the community came to the museum and said, our songlines are dying, what can you do to bring them into the public domain that we might keep them alive? And so it was a 7-year negotiation to create this exhibition that then allowed us to create 2 works for the museum. One is based at Cave Hill, and the other is a journey into the artwork of the Matu ladies. So this full dome work was created with just 2 days of photography on site and includes gigapixel imaging, panoramic video, time-lapse photography, and photogrammetry of a cave that had never ever been photographed before. So this work allows viewers intimate views of stories contained in the sandstone folds of the cave. Archaic dome theatres are typified by the rock art caves found throughout Australia, many of the oldest paintings in the arcades of the world. Discussing the appeal of projection domes in present-day media theorist Nick Lambert argues that these ancient caves where etchings and paintings were animated by fire and torchlight represent the beginnings of a cinematic imaginary and are arguably the first immersive experiences created by humankind. The perceived hemispheric curvature of the dome has been rendered architecturally by many cultures throughout the world and is used to enfold the most sacred of environments, from Buddhist stupas and Jain temples to Islamic mosques and Christian cathedrals. Dome constructions are places of ritual communion and transcendence. With both internal and external surfaces fused with iconography and geometric symbolism, domes continue to represent worldviews for many traditions. Throughout the ages, such arched enclosures have often been used as surfaces upon which to represent psycho-cosmological constructs decorated with the renderings of incorporeal archetypes. And the second work for the museum is based on the artwork. The ladies created these very large jumpy figures. They were then acquired by the museum into the collection of the National Museum. We undertook photogrammetry of them to create models. Each painting was specifically done for the dome, and the narrative was unfolded for us who cannot read Aboriginal worldview paintings. This is a shot from the opening of the exhibition. It has been highly successful and it won the major awards in Australia for last year and is now going to tour the world. I think what was most important about it is the watershed in curatorial and museum, national museum relationships in Australia, which have been quite challenged over the history since contact. As cultural practices are brought into the museum, intangible heritage is transformed into tangible objects. Such an approach to preserving intangible heritage contributes to an interpretive framework that's markedly different from traditional heritage preservation, one that is central to this presentation. These differences are defined by an intangible cultural heritage understanding of authenticity. Indeed, archival notions of authenticity presume the existence of an original entity which has had its identity and integrity maintained over time, where intangible cultural heritage has no original. Thank you.